Are you a transcendentalist? Now, because Unitarian Universalism embraces such a wide variety of beliefs, UUs sometimes get more specific about what they believe. They'll say, I am an atheist, I am a humanist, I am a Christian, I am a Buddhist, I'm agnostic, I'm pagan. But you seldom hear Unitarian Universalists say, I am a transcendentalist. And oftentimes on forms that get sent out from the UUA, the National Association, and they ask what people believe, they don't put transcendentalists on the form, which is sad to me, because transcendentalism is our tradition's original contribution to the world of ideas. It has its roots in Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, and Theodore Parker. We so often borrow from so many traditions. I think it's important for us to remember our own homegrown tradition. Transcendentalism is a philosophy that urges us to follow our intuition, to blaze our own path on our spiritual journey. Transcendentalism is the unspoken heart and soul of Unitarian Universalism. Many of us are transcendentalists and do not know it. Transcendentalism is what allows us to be a collection of humanistic Christo-pagan Buddhists. Because we know that we are connected by something deeper that transcends all the boundaries of religion. In The Transcendentalist, a lecture read at the Masonic Temple in Boston in 1842, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "The Transcendentalist adopts the whole connection of spiritual doctrine. He believes in miracle, in perpetual openness of the human mind to a new influx of light and power. He believes in inspiration and ecstasy. He wishes that the spiritual principle shall be suffered to demonstrate itself to the end in all possible applications to the state of man without admission of anything unspiritual. That is, anything positive, dogmatic, personal. Thus, the spiritual measure of inspiration is the depth of thought, and never who said it. And so he resists all attempts to palm other rules and measures on the spirit other than its own." This quote reflects a respect for the spirit greater than all the stated beliefs about spirit. This idea that UUs are always wondering and questioning what that belief means to me. How am I going to use that belief in my life? That personal interaction and that trusting of one's personal path. Emerson believed that the soul of each person is identical to the oversoul, or the soul of the universe, and that by getting in touch with oneself, one could be in touch with everything. Everything real is self-existent. Everything divine shares its self-existence of deity. All that you call the world is the shadow of the substance of which you are, the perpetual creations of the power of thought, of those that are dependent and those that are independent of your will. Let the soul be erect, and all things will go well. You think me the child of my circumstances? I make my circumstances. Let any thought or motive of mine be different from that they are. The difference will transform my condition and economy. This thought, which is called I, is the mold into which the world is poured like melted wax. The mold is invisible, but the world betrays the shape of the mold. So he does not deny an empirical reality that's out there, but he affirms that whatever that reality that is out there, we filter and shape by our own choices and decisions about what we're going to do with that reality and how we perceive that reality. University of California professor Paul Rubens, in his Perspectives in American Literature, says that transcendentalism has 4 basic premises. 1, an individual is the spiritual center of the universe, and ultimately the cosmos itself. It's not a rejection of the existence of God, but a preference to explain an individual and the world in terms of an individual. And 2, the structure of the universe literally duplicates the structure of individual self. All knowledge, therefore, begins with self-knowledge, similar to Aristotle's dictum, know thyself. And transcendentalists accept the Neoplatonic conception of nature as living mystery, full of signs. Nature is symbolic. Because it's not that a tree exists. It's how we respond to the tree. I don't know who the poet was, but I think we've all heard the poem, I think I'll never see a poem as lovely as a tree. That definitely has transcendentalist fingerprints all over it. That sense that a tree is a tree and you can analyze its organic properties. But the transcendentalist looks at the tree as a poem, each human being as a poem, the universe as a poem. Everything that is real inspires a deeper and wider understanding. And finally, 4th, the belief that the individual virtue and happiness depend on self-realization and depends on the reconciliation of 2 universal tendencies. The expansive and self-transcending tendency, a desire to embrace all, and the second tendency, the contracting, self-asserting tendency, the desire to withdraw and remain unique and separate. So on a first blush, transcendentalism seems very individualistic, but it's that individual retreat that brings about the realization of all the connections to the universe. And so there's that constant struggle to reconcile oneself with the other, to look for the ideal that transcends the self, to discover how one is connected to the universe. And the transcendentalist impulse can be found in many faiths. In Christianity, Jesus transcends the difference between God and humans. In Buddhism, nirvana is the realization of oneness and the elimination of duality. In science, the orbits of our molecules are one with the orbits of the universe. Pagans become one with nature. By nature, transcendentalism is very individualistic because it trusts the individual intuition. Yet there are some principles that are consistent across the different philosophers. Again, from Professor Paul Rubin. It's essentially a form of idealism. It rises above the lower impulses, and the human soul is part of the oversoul. And therefore, every individual is to be respected because everyone has a portion of that oversoul. Jesus had a part of God in himself. He was divine, but only as everyone is divine, except that he might have been a little bit better at it than the rest of us. And that miracles, as reported in the Bible, are not necessarily proofs of Jesus. In fact, Emerson's quoted as saying, "Miracle is a monster," because it kind of takes us away from the everyday miracle. Walt Whitman wrote, "A mouse is a miracle, enough to stagger quintillions of infidels." That we don't wait for holiness to startle us and have an epiphany and have the light come down from heaven. We, by our approach to the world, look for heaven in every object, in everything. The miracle is always there. And more important than the concern for an afterlife should be a concern for this life. Emphasis is placed on the here and now. As Thoreau put, "Give me one world at a time." Evil is a negative, merely the absence of good. Light is more powerful than darkness because one ray of light penetrates the dark. The emphasis is on self-reliance, on human thinking. You have the necessity of great writers and thinkers, but you don't stop there. You don't stop at quoting people. You use whatever inspires you to do your own thinking, to make your own reality. And your reality will change from day to day as new information comes in. And so one shouldn't harden one's thoughts into a belief. And so you have faith and intuition. No church or creed can communicate truth. There is a reality out there that continually unfolds, and as we look at it, we learn more, and learning never ceases. And so you don't defend old creeds, you don't make up new creeds and try to convert people and reform them. Reform comes from within. But reform for transcendentalists could not be avoided. Because once they realized the oneness of themselves with the universe and other people, they acted upon that belief. Thoreau withdrew, and he went to Walden Pond, where he studied Hindu scripture and tried to live the life of a Hindu yogi. He said, "One may discover the root of a Hindu religion in his own private history, when in the silent intervals of the day or night he does sometimes inflict on himself like austerities with a stern satisfaction. Free in this world as the birds in the air, disengaged from every kind of chains, those who practice the yoga gather in Brahma or God the certain fruits of their works. The yogi, absorbed in contemplation, contributes in his degree to creation. He breathes a divine perfume. He hears wonderful things, Divine forms transverse him without tearing him, and united to the nature which is proper in him, he goes, he acts as animating original matter. To some extent and rare intervals, even I am a yogi. And it's this idea that once one is aware of the connection, one can't help but act. One's not pushing an agenda, one is acting in harmony with one's truth. And it was during this time of retreat that Thoreau was thrown in jail for not paying taxes that supported slavery. Gandhi was inspired by Thoreau's treatise on civil disobedience, and Martin Luther King was in turn inspired by Gandhi. And it's so no wonder that Unitarian Universalist minister James Reed was inspired by Dr. King and became a martyr for the cause of civil rights. The times and places change, but these lives were connected by a truth that transcends space and time. Social action is not done for the sake of joining a movement. Social action naturally springs forth when one reforms oneself and aligns oneself with truth. We see a similar impulse of social action rising from personal faith in Margaret Fuller, a transcendentalist who pioneered feminism by living a liberated life. In her 1845 book, Women in the 19th Century, she inspired reformers like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She wrote, "Let us be wise and not impede the soul. Let her work as she will. Let us have one creative energy, one incessant revelation. Let it take what form it will, and let us not bind it by the past to man or woman, black or white." You can see in this quote how it moves from the mystical of letting the soul run unbounded, and then immediately to racial justice and gender justice. From understanding comes the action for equality. Bronson Alcott was a friend of Emerson and focused his ideas on education. And instead of, as the practice of the day, having students learn to write by transcribing the great speeches from the past, he asked students to write from their own experience. Arguably, his best student was his daughter, Louisa May Alcott. And this passage from Little Women shows the influence of transcendentalism. While they're grieving the death of her sister, they go out into the country. And Alcott writes, "The invigorating air did them both good, and much exercise worked wholesome changes in minds as well as bodies. They seemed to get clearer views of life and duty up there among the everlasting hills. The fresh winds blew away desponding doubts, delusive fancies, and moody mists. The warm spring sunshine brought out all sorts of aspiring ideas, tender hopes, and happy thoughts. The lake seemed to wash away the troubles of the past, and the grand old mountains to look benignly down upon them, saying, 'Little children, love one another.'" In this passage, nature restores one and then calls one to action. Emily Dickinson wrote about the immanence of God and the immediately presence of God. She wrote, "Who has not found the heaven below will fail of it above. God's residence is next to mine. His furniture is love." Most transcendentalists were from Unitarian families. Some remained in the church and others left. And those that left the church kind of followed them in moving away from Orthodox Christianity. An exception is Walt Whitman, who attended Universalist churches and probably more than anyone lived the transcendental life, refusing to be defined and grasping for and seeking a life of freedom. And in his transcendental grasp, you also can hear the universalism. And I know that the hand of God is the promise of my own. And I know that the Spirit of God is the brother of my own, and that all men ever born are also my brothers, and the women my sisters and lovers, and that the kelson of creation is love. I love that phrase, the kelson of creation is love. I just like the rhythm of it. But I didn't have any idea what a kelson was. But it sure feels good to say the kelson of creation is love. I mean, that's what poets do. Well, a kelson, I found out through looking up, is the framework one uses in shipbuilding in which to place the keel in to shape the keel that keeps the boat from tipping over. So the kelson is a tool used in shipbuilding so that one's keel stays aligned and works properly. And the kelson of creation is love. He goes on and he talks about the measured face of other land, the grandeurs of the past, are not for thee, but grandeurs of thine own. Deific face and amplitudes, absorbing, comprehending all. All, eligible to all. All for immortality. Love like the light, silently wrapping all. Nature's amelioration. They used big words in the 19th century. Nature's amelioration, blessing all. So this day, this refulgent springtime day. Refulgent is one of Emerson's famous words. It means just beautiful. I ask you to be a transcendentalist, not so that you may recite Emerson, Thoreau, and Fuller, or Whitman, but that you have the faith to quote yourselves. If you gain power by walking through an empty cornfield, sing about it. If you gain power by the way a puddle on the sidewalk contains itself and just swirls there and seems to have a life of its own, believe it. Believe in yourself as a single drop of rain that might be similar to other drops of rain, but at the same time totally unique, because you are where you are right now, and the purpose of your place and time can only be your purpose. And if you look deep down and live your own purpose, have faith that somehow your purpose is connected to the wider purpose. The wisdom of all religions and ages are available to us, but we have to look at them through our own eyes, rethink them with our own thoughts, and act upon our own interpretation. Margaret Fuller said, "Very early, I knew that the only object in life was to grow. So go and grow. In this growing season, be as strong as a crocus that defies winter. Be who you are and always know that you can be better. There is always somewhere to go. There is always some way to grow. To grow in our understanding of ourselves, and thereby grow in understanding of the universal, and then acting upon what we know, and knowing that every action we take will give us new things to learn and new ways to grow. It never ends. It's eternal. But it's your life. And live it and know that you are connected to the whole. May we bless and be blessed.